So we'll call the meeting to order. It's Tuesday, October 12th, 2021, Stoughton City Council. First point of business would be the roll call.
Good evening, everyone. Caravello.
Here.
Doom.
Here.
Hiley.
Here.
Hirsch.
Here.
Hunt.
Here.
Jensen.
Here.
Lagaki. Here. Mayeski.
I think you left.
Reeves.
Here.
Schumacher.
Here.
Tukalski.
Here.
And Venegas.
Here.
Okay, we have 11 alders present, 1 absent.
All right, thank you. Minutes and reports are in the packet. I think there was a couple missing. If anybody is looking for anything in particular, we'll send them out. Nobody was signed up for the public comment period tonight. So the item of business that would be in front of us would be communications and presentations. And Candy was going to do kind of a quick update on the census.
Yes, thank you. We have Doug Poland from Stafford Law joining us tonight too, and he's going to do a little more detail in regards to the redistricting that is on our lap right now. But this is coming really quick. We hope to have a final map approved by the county tomorrow. So I guess if Mayor Swadley, if you want to turn it over to Mr. Poland, he'll kind of give you guys a little more detail about our maps that I'm working on.
Yeah, certainly he can take it over. Unfortunately, I can't get the screen share to work, so I don't know what is going on with that. So hopefully you can run through it without it. I'll continue to try to figure it out.
Okay.
There we go. Good evening, everyone. My name is Doug Poland. I'm a partner at Stafford Rosenbaum in Madison. I practice in the area of election and political law, including redistricting. I've been involved in redistricting at the state and municipal level in Wisconsin for about 11 years. Let me see if I can get my screen share to work and I can run. It says only the host can share in this meeting. So that might not be an available option.
Yeah, and it's showing it disabled. So I'm not really sure what the deal is.
Okay.
And
okay.
I can't enable it.
Okay. All right. Well, let me do this then. Hopefully, let me see. Can you still see me okay? And hear me okay?
See your picture and we can hear you, Doug.
Okay, great. Thanks. Let me just quickly run through this then. Quickly with redistricting, I just want to give you a little bit of background so there's some context for what Candy's going to present then. We redistrict every 10 years, as people might know, and that's in reaction to the census. The census is taken every 10 years. 2010 was the last one. We just had one last year in 2020 as well. The reason that we have to draw new districts is that in the 1960s, the United States Supreme Court had a number of decisions that we call the one person, one vote decisions. And so the US Supreme Court decided that the US Constitution requires equality of population among different districts from which we elect our representatives. This applies to congressional districts throughout the state. So those are the districts from which we elect our representatives to the US House. It applies to state legislative districts. It applies to local government districts as well, like county supervisory districts and aldermanic districts too. So a population equality applies and happens every year after we have the decennial census. There was a change in the way that we did municipal redistricting, local redistricting from before 2011 to how we've done it after 2011. So for anyone who is involved in it before 2011, as you might remember, there was a sequence where municipalities would draw their wards first as they saw fit to draw them within certain criteria that were designated by law, but they draw them first. They would then give the supervisory districts to counties, and the counties would draw the districts using the wards as building blocks. Those would then be given to the state legislature, which would draw its legislative districts using the wards as building blocks. That all changed in 2011. The legislature changed the law, and it changed it in two key ways. Now, wards must be based on whole census blocks. Census blocks are the smallest units of measurement that are used by the United States Census Bureau. So you don't control it, the county doesn't control it, the state doesn't control it. It's the US Census Bureau that decides what is a census block. And so wards just have to incorporate entire census blocks. You could have one census block or two census block within a ward potentially, but you can't have part of a census block. So that was one key change. The other key change that the legislature made in 2011 is that it changed the order in which districts are drawn, wards and then state legislative districts are drawn. And the most important impact of that is that wards can't cross state legislative district boundaries, and they have to be adjusted if they do. So even though wards are typically drawn by municipalities before state legislative districts are actually done, once the state legislative districts are actually designed, if a ward boundary conflicts with a state legislative district boundary, then the wards have to be adjusted themselves. The state legislative district boundaries control, right? So I want to run over just generally the timeline here that generally applies, and then I'm going to talk specifically about the timeline this year. So generally, what the statutes provide is that the counties are supposed to prepare tentative plans of their supervisory districts within 60 days of the release of census data. Now, the census data in most years are released on March 31st, and that's when they were supposed to be released this year. But there were problems with the census this year, and so the census data weren't released until August. So even though the statute says that the county is supposed to prepare tentative plans within 60 days of the census data release, and by July 1st at the latest, the census data weren't actually released until after July 1st. And so we're just completely out of the way that the timeline that the statute set forth for how this procedure is supposed to work. So the procedure is supposed to have the county preparing a tentative plan within 60 days of the release of the census data or by July 1st. Then the municipality is supposed to adopt wards within 60 days of receiving the county plan. And then notifying the county within 5 days at the time that the municipality adopts its wards. And then the county would normally have 60 days to adopt its final plan. That's how it's supposed to work, but it just doesn't work that way this year, again, because the redistricting data was released by the Census Bureau so late in mid-August. So I'm going to get back to what the timeline is for this year in just a moment, but let me just quickly speak to what the criteria are for how the wards have to be drawn under the state statutes. So there are specific ranges that are prescribed in the Wisconsin statutes for the population of each ward. They're set forth in the statute. There's a minimum population for each ward and a maximum population for each ward, depending on the overall population of the city. And so Stoughton falls within one of those specific categories. And so it's got its maximum and minimum populations that it's allowed to draw wards to. Second of all, the wards have to comply with some laws that you might think that wouldn't necessarily apply. So for example, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, that would apply to aldermanic districts and to county supervisory districts as well. And because the wards make up the building blocks for aldermanic and county supervisory districts, those districts have to comply with the Voting Rights Act. That is not going to come into play here because you don't have the kinds of districts, the kind of minority populations that would be necessary to really bring the Voting Rights Act into play. But nevertheless, it gives you an idea of sort of the scope of laws that potentially could apply here. Wards have to be made up of whole census blocks. That's right in the state in a statute. They have to be entirely contained within one county. That's within the statute. Here, that's not a problem, obviously. Wards have to be compact, and that is not something that is defined by the statute, but there are compactness scores that we use that are sort of generally accepted to be able to measure compactness. They have to be contiguous. That means they can't be broken apart into different sort of islands. They have to all be, within one specific block. And they have to respect communities of interest as well. So if you've got a population, for example, let's say it's an ethnic population in a certain part of the municipality, that might be seen as a community of interest that would need to be kept together within a ward. So now the timeline this year, like I said, the census data weren't released until mid-August. So we're just already way beyond the timelines that the Wisconsin statutes prescribe for county and municipal redistricting already to be done. So it's just sort of out the window. Nobody's going to comply with those dates. And so now it's a practical question of how do we get municipal wards and county supervisory districts and aldermanic district boundaries drawn so that candidates can circulate nomination papers by December 1st. And what Dane County has come up with is a timeline that is available online. I'd show it to you if I could, but I can't. But this, the timeline says that by October 14th, the county board is going to hold a public hearing on the potential tentative map, and the board will take action on a tentative map at that meeting. So October 14th, 2 days from now, as Candy said, that's when the county board, the Dane County Board, is going to have its county supervisory districts ready. So between October 15th and November 5th, a very short timeline this year, obviously not the 60 days that you'd normally have in any other year. That's the time where the municipalities are going to adjust their ward boundaries to try to comply with the county supervisory district boundaries, and they will submit their ward plans to the county. And then the county is also going to have a very short turnaround time. Again, not the 60 days they normally have, but they're going to decide on their final supervisory district boundaries by November 18th, 2021. November 18th then is also going to be the deadline for municipalities to adopt their aldermanic district boundaries. So, so that's, I'm sorry, I actually misstated that. The cities are going to adopt their aldermanic district boundaries within 60 days of the receipt of the plans themselves. That's what it normally would be. But there is that practical limitation in there of December 1st, because that's the deadline for candidates for office in the spring elections to begin to circulate nomination papers. So what we're really looking at, I think, is a practical deadline of December 1st. The only other deadline that I wanted to make you aware of, remember I mentioned before that when the legislature changed the statute in 2011 to draw wards and legislative district boundaries, they did say that municipalities must adjust their ward boundaries if they conflict with state legislative district boundaries. There's a deadline under the statutes to do that, and that's April 10th. So if the state legislature ends up adopting state legislative districts, and there's a conflict between the district lines and the ward lines that municipalities draw, the municipalities have to adjust their wards by April 10th. There's an additional complication to that this year because we're involved in litigation over the state legislative district boundaries. And I just have to tell you, because I'm lead counsel for some of the parties in cases that are currently pending in the state Supreme Court and in the federal court here in Madison, that it is not yet clear exactly when there will be a final decision by a court on what those state legislative district boundaries are. We're urging the courts to have them all in place so it's all done by March 15th, but the courts haven't yet made a decision on what that timeline is going to be. So with that, I am going to stop my presentation and either happy to take questions, or Candy, if you want to jump into your presentation, you can do that as well.
Thanks. I'm unable to share my screen as well. So if we have any questions, go ahead. Otherwise, I can kind of go over the timeline.
Well, Doug just went over the timeline. Do you have a different timeline, Candy?
Well, just what we're doing here for the city, if anyone would have any questions. I mean, it's pretty, Doug said it. We hope to have everything back to you by October 26th. So it'll be resolutions, ordinances, hopefully the final maps that we would like to approve. Everything that we have in draft version is in the packet. And our ultimate goal is to minimize the impact to voters. Right now, we're maintaining 12 alders for districts with 3-year terms. So I guess our biggest thing, and Doug is helping me with this, we have Ward 9 that has a very minimal population. We were hoping we could leave it at that with the idea that it was going to be able to absorb the incoming homes from KPW, but doesn't look like we can leave that in that small of a population right now, according to the law. So I guess that's as far as I can go with all of that. Any questions or?
Well, here's my question. So the idea is that on the next October City Council meeting agenda, you would expect to present a map at that time that you believe at least meets the legal requirements for,
Yes.
yeah. And are we anticipating a need for the council to vote on the map at that meeting? Is that the expectation?
Yes, we will have ordinances and everything as we need to turn around and give that approved map and the supporting resolutions and ordinances back to the county by November 5th.
So, and is that the first time the council's going to see that map?
I have the draft in the packet tonight. If anyone has any comments about it, I would take any and all comments, observations, but we have to sort through Ward 9, but otherwise that map is pretty about as adjusted as I can go with it right now.
Jean Legaki here. I have a
Yep, go ahead.
question just in clarification on the maps.
Mm-hmm.
In the packet, is the first map in the order that you sent them out, is that the current map? And then is the second map the proposed, or can you explain what each of these two maps are, please?
Yes, absolutely. The current one would be, let me get to that here on my other screen. We have the current, how it stands right now, what our maps and wards, everything are right now would be your current one. And then I also attached the populations that are currently associated with those wards. And then the next one is the draft. And I call it the draft. That's what I've come up with by attaching the non-contiguous areas, so on and so forth, trying to balance that population. And then I also attached the proposed the populations that would go along with that draft map. You'll notice Ward 9 is, I think the population is at 53. And that we cannot leave it like that. So I have to do a little bit of adjusting over there in District 4 yet.
Andy, would you like me to explain just very briefly the population issue?
Certainly, yeah, please.
Okay, so the I mentioned is one of the criteria that has to be met is this idea of equal population. And in some districts, like congressional districts, it has to be perfectly equal. So the 8 congressional districts in Wisconsin have to be the same to the person. There's a little bit more latitude that's allowed the smaller that you get in with districts. So for example, for state legislative districts or county supervisory districts or even aldermanic districts, we allow a greater what we call population deviation, or a difference in population from the least populated to the most populated districts. So in the chart that Candy circulated, you'll see there's a column that says percent deviation. And then it'll say, for example, Ward 1 is 108.2%. That means that district is overpopulated by 8.2% from what the average population would be among all the districts. A 10% population deviation is presumably constitutional. That means it's assumed to be okay. It's assumed to be just fine from a population deviation standpoint. So that when Candy is drawing these districts, what she's trying to do is she's trying to keep those districts either within 10% over the ideal population for district or ward, or 10% under. So all of those districts that are plus or minus about 10% are going to be just fine. Even if you go a little bit more, a little higher, a little bit lower than that, you're probably still going to be fine. Doesn't mean it's invalid. It just means that the presumption doesn't apply. But if there are good reasons to do it, then then that's okay too. And the bottom line here is that somebody would have to challenge these districts. Somebody who didn't like the way the districts were drawn would have to say, I'm going to bring a court challenge because I don't think these districts are unconstitutional. So that's something you'd have to keep in mind as well. But the population deviations here are all very close. The only one, District 5, is a little overpopulated because it's about 20% over. We've got a couple here, like District 3 is 15% under. And then the real problem, though, is District 9 because that population is just so low. But it's tricky. It's not easy to do.
And then Doug, there's also a kind of a outside parameters that we're not allowed to deviate from. 600 can't be less than 600 people. Is that right?
That's right. So that's under the statute. That's written right into statute, section 5.15. And so for any city that is a city, village, or town, which the population is at least 10,000, but less than 39,000 inhabitants, each ward, I'm reading from the statute, shall contain not less than 600, no more than 2,100 inhabitants. And so we were looking for exceptions to that rule. If there were reasons that municipalities would be allowed to populate wards at numbers lower than that minimum. And there are some, but it doesn't look like any of them apply here. The only one that might potentially would be if Dane County drew its supervisory district boundaries in a way that required Candy to adjust one of the ward populations either up or down so that it would make sure that the county would fit within its own equal population or population deviation requirements. She could do that. But I don't think, from what I've seen at least, that Ward 9 falls within that. But I guess we'll find out when we get the final county supervisory district plan.
So I have a question. So we have wards and then we have districts. Are you also trying to make sure that all 4 of our districts are equally populated? So you're not having one district that's a lot more than the other, so there's equal representation for each of those?
That's exactly right. That's a great question. That's exactly right. So the aldermanic districts, and I will just note that that's the way that they're called. They're called aldermanic. But the districts for alders are subject to the same equal population requirements. There aren't statutorily prescribed maximums and minimums for those districts, but we are looking to keep them again within that same 10% deviation, population deviation from the most populated to the least populated.
And I have another question. When you gave your talk, you talked about how if there was a unique population within a community, you would try to keep them all in the same ward. Why would you do that? Why wouldn't that, I don't understand the philosophy behind that.
The idea is that, and it applies really much more to aldermanic districts than to wards. This is something that's included within the statutes. The idea is that we want people with common interests, with shared interests, to have common representation. And so we want them to be within the same political subdivision or unit, so they can, because they have those shared interests. It really does apply much more. You're not represented on the basis of an individual ward. You are represented on the basis of an aldermanic district. So it really is much more important for the purposes of those districts than it is for the wards themselves.
Doug, could you give an example of that in history where that occurred, perhaps in the last 20 years?
Of communities of interest?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Let me give you one. This is going to be a little bit larger example, but let me give you an example from the last go round of redistricting litigation we had in 2011. And so this is state legislative districts. It's the same principle. It can apply on a municipal level. But we had state legislative districts in the center city in Milwaukee. And we brought a Section 2 Voting Rights Act challenge to the way that 2 districts were composed. They were supposed to be Latino opportunity districts, meaning that these were districts that that were specifically formed to give Latino voters an opportunity to elect representatives of their choosing under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And the way the legislature drew a boundary between those 2 districts, it drew it right down the center of a street that was the heart of the Latino community in Milwaukee. And so basically you would have half of that community that would be in one state legislative district and half that would be in a separate legislative district. Now, the court recognized, because the testimony that we put on in that case, that that was really one community. And so what the legislature did in drawing that district boundary is it bisected that community. It divided that community up. So it wouldn't have common representation by one single representative in the state assembly. You could get the same thing on a municipal level. For example, if you had an ethnic neighborhood that was really a cohesive population, it could be drawn within one aldermanic district. So they had a single alder that was representing them, and instead you sort of broke up that community and put that community into 2 different districts, aldermanic districts. That could be a problem. You're not preserving that community of interest.
Could I add a little something to that? The reason the population is kept in the same district is by dividing the population, you may eliminate their opportunity to vote for and elect a representative that actually represents their community. So by keeping the Latino community together, they can elect a representative that represents the Latino community. Whereas if you split it up, you may get 2 representatives, neither of which represent their community. So I think that's the reason for it also.
Yep, it really
Or
does.
conversely, you get 2 representatives that, represent the Latino community as opposed to 1. It all depends on the population and how the lines are drawn too.
Sure, if the Latino community was large enough to elect 2 representatives, but even when it was split, then you might end up with 2. But if the community isn't large enough and it gets split, you may end up with 0. So the population is kept together so they have the opportunity to elect 1.
Okay.
That was our argument that we won on back in 2011. But I don't know. I don't know the city of Stoughton well enough to say whether what kinds of communities of interest that you have there. You all obviously do. It's your neighborhood. It's your community. So you all know that.
All right, are there any other questions? Alderperson Lagaki, go ahead.
Hopefully just a quick one. When you talk about special voting blocks, special populations, unique populations, is there a definition of how they define those? Could they be gender? Could they be immigration status? Could they be sexual orientation? Is there a list?
That is a great question. And the answer to that, unfortunately, is no, there is not. And that is a subject of tremendous interest and disagreement among a lot of different people. For example, the People's Maps Commission that you might have heard about, that Governor Evers commissioned, a year and a half ago, they were really prioritizing communities of interest. And it is in the eye of the beholder. And so they've been going around and they've been asking people around the different districts in Wisconsin, what do you consider to be a community of interest in your community? And that is one of the really sort of mushy parts of redistricting, and why we really rely on local officials to tell us what they think that the cohesive community of interest might be in their particular community. It could be any or all of those things that you mentioned. It really is how the people themselves define it.
You.
All right, any other questions? I believe that Dane County has it down to 3 choices and they're set to take a vote Thursday night. So we'll know a little bit more then, but it probably won't change what we're doing that much. And as Candy mentioned, that she would be bringing things back, and we really just had to get things on the agenda and get some notices out to meet the tight timelines. And as Candy mentioned, based on feedback when we were setting up the citizen committees, it didn't seem like there was much of a desire from council members to really look at changing aldermanic districts and reducing or increasing the number of alders or anything like that. So we tried to keep it as simple as we could. And I think that's something we could always revisit down the line if that's something we wanted to do, and we can check into the regulations regarding that as well. Now that we have Doug as a resource.
And I want to thank Doug for joining us tonight.
You're welcome. Happy to do it. I wanted to mention that the question about changing aldermanic districts down the line, can it be done mid-decade? That is something that's come up as a question other municipalities have had. We've seen such tremendous growth in many communities within Dane County, and that may be a real issue, but we can certainly help you with that. And if it would help you also to have the slides that I did have ready to provide, I'd be happy to provide those to Candy, and she could make them available if you'd like.
That'd be great. Thanks again.
Yep, thank you. And yes, I would look forward to seeing those slides.
You're welcome. I'll make sure I get them to Candy.
Thanks, Doug.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right.
Bye-bye.
That takes us to the any communications from alders tonight? Hearing none, we'll go right into the consent agenda. There was 2 items on there. I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Move to approve.
Is there a second? Okay, a motion and a second. Anybody like anything acted on separately? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? None opposed, that motion carries. That would take us to old business. Ordinance 20 of 2021 is the second reading from the Plan Commission, and Alderperson Caravello, you would be up.
And it sounds like there are some technical difficulties, because can you bring this up on the screen, or are you still not able to do that?
I'm still having issues. I can read it for you though. It's a request by Forward Development Group to rezone the right-of-way and open space lands within the plat of the Meadows at Kettle Park West to SR5 single-family residential.
And I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
I think I heard Alderperson Doom is the second. And I'll switch this back to Alderperson Caravello. If you look on the packet on page 6, kind of shows the picture of what we were calling the eyebrow, which is what we're rezoning. And really it actually eliminates that kind of cul-de-sac area. And I guess it looks like there's other maps on pages 19 through 21, but to keep it simple, I think the map on page 6 will sum it up for you if you look in your packet. Alderperson Caravello, go ahead.
Yeah, basically this is just a rezone from open space to single family residential due to the removal or discontinuation, I think, for the most part, of that Castle Circle horseshoe, and they're just going to turn that into single family residential and make a bigger lot out of it.
All right, are there any questions or comments from alders or? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Next one also is the second reading from Plan Commission, and that's Ordinance 21 of 2021. And that's a request by Randy Rosema to rezone the property at 2124 Whole Circle from SR4 Single Family Residential to SR5 Single Family Residential. Alderperson Caravello, you may recall this is the one, I think, with the deck addition.
Yes, and I so move.
Second,
All right, and the second, any discussion, Alderperson Caravello?
And this change would allow them to, would change the setback from SR4, which is a 30-foot setback, to SR5, which is 25 feet, so that these folks could make the addition of a 3-season room to the rear of their home.
And on that one, if you were to look in the packet, there's a map on page 16 and page 19 that pretty much just shows that little addition that they're putting on the backyard there. Anything you want to add, Director Shield?
Oh, I think Mr. Caravello did a fine job. It doesn't change the permitted uses of the district. This lot is on a cul-de-sac, which also creates some challenges. The building was set back a little bit deeper in order to meet the setback requirements of the front. So reducing the rear setback to accommodate this seems like a reasonable request.
All right, any questions or comments? Hearing and seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 And any opposed? None opposed, that motion carries. Next item is R155 of 2021. This one is coming from the library board. Alderperson Legaki.
And Jim Ramsey is also here, but this is resolution 155 of 2021. The resolution requesting exemption from the county library tax because we contribute. I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderperson Schumacher. Anything else you'd like to add, Alderperson Legaki, or you want to turn it over to Director Ramsey?
Turning it over, this is a usual yearly event and Jim will add anything he would like to.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Alder Legati. As was mentioned already, this is a resolution that is adopted by our municipality and by all municipalities in the county annually, requesting exemption from the county library tax. So state law gives the county the right to set up a county library service and to levy a tax on municipalities in that county to provide library services to residents of the county. Municipalities can request an exemption from this tax, and municipalities that support libraries always do request an exemption. And there are two criteria that have to be met in order to be exempt from the county library tax. One is that the city or the municipality, the city or the village has to contribute at least the amount of an amount calculated by looking at the equalized value of property, and that is what's called the minimum appropriation. So there is a rock bottom minimum set for the amount that a municipality has to contribute to its library. So that's one criteria. The other is the library itself has to meet a series of 6 standards. If you're interested in what the standards are, I can let you know. But in the interest of time, I'll just say that we are meeting all of those standards. And the city does support the library in excess of the minimum amount required. So with those 2 criteria met, the city is eligible to be exempt from the county library tax.
Any questions or comments?
This is a good thing, so I would move for approval.
All right, any other comments?
Second.
All right, hearing none, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? That motion carries. Next couple items are coming from the Personnel Committee. R-156 of 2021, Alderperson Reeves.
Thank you, Mayor. Resolution 156, 2021, authorizing and directing the proper city officials to approve the 2022 courts renewal at a 5% increase and Delta Dental with a flat renewal, and personnel recommended approval 4-0 and 10-4. And I so move.
Second,
Second by Alderperson Hunt. Anything you'd like to add, Alderperson Reeves?
Well, AJ is, our Director Gillingham is here as well, but I think, you know, based on what I've been reading, a fair amount of literature says that most employers are expecting an increase of 6.5 to 10%. So I would just like to say kudos to Director Gillingham for keeping it at 5% and no increase with Delta Dental. So I think she deserves a lot of credit for the work she did just to keep it at 5% under the COVID has cost a lot of money, you know, to employers, hospitals, et cetera. So I think 5% is very reasonable. So.
All right, Director Gillingham, anything you'd like to add?
Just that the dollar impact on this will be $75,405. So that's our total impact. Our initial number came in at 9%, and we were able to ratchet it down to 5%. So we're pretty pleased to see that. The book of business that our broker has, Cottingham and Butler, they are seeing upwards of double digits, so 10% and above. So we were the lowest renewal that came in. So we're pretty excited about that.
Excellent. Thank you for all the hard work. I know you spent a lot of time on it and, you know, a lot of communication on what direction we should go. And, you know, unfortunately, you know, with the state spending caps, really limits how much revenue we can take in to help offset costs when they do exceed, you know, 2 or 3%, where our growth, you know, hasn't even reached that. So, you know, it's certainly something that I'll be discussing at the conference I go to in a couple of weeks. You know, it's really not sustainable, and our benefits are really one of the few things that we can still provide our employees that are, you know, as competitive or more competitive than a lot of things in the private market. So it's getting, you know, it has been challenging, but really it feels like things keep getting tighter budget wise, and you know, we'll talk about that a little bit more at our committee of the whole meetings, but we do the best we can. And I know AJ worked really hard in order to secure the 5%. So I'm pleased with that. It's much less disruptive than changing providers, not only for you know, HR department, but also for all the staff members. It's a difficult process to have to go through. Been through that several times myself, and by settling at 5%, we're able to avoid doing that. So thank you, AJ.
You're welcome.
Anybody else have any questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 And any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. And R-157 of 2021, Alderperson Reeves.
Thank you. Resolution 157, 2021, authorizing and directing proper city officials to approve the updated position description for the police offer, which includes the addition of city-sponsored police academy, and I so move.
Second, and I believe that resolution header should read police officer rather than offer.
That is correct.
Thank you. I wondered about that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Alderperson Reeves.
I believe Chief Leck is on the line, but as many of you know, it's becoming increasingly difficult to recruit police officers. And so this provides the option to sponsor a candidate to go through the police academy in hopes of potentially broadening the candidate pool. Chief, would you like to add anything to that?
You did a very good job. The only thing I'd mention is that if we do end up sending somebody to the academy, the class is reimbursed by the Department of Justice. The problem it poses for us is it adds about another 5 months to the process because the academy class is 720 hours. So our process is usually run, if everything goes right, about 6 months from the time we put the ad out to the time we actually have an officer ready for solo patrol. So this would take that to anywhere from 11 to 12 months before we have the officer ready to do solo patrol.
All
I
right.
have a
Any
que- I'm
questions,
sorry.
comments for the chief?
I have a question, Chief. So this is actually taking somebody that hasn't been accepted into the academy, and then we would pay or get reimbursed for them to go through the academy, as opposed to somebody that is currently in the academy but hasn't completed all their 720 hours. I guess I need some clarification. So I didn't read that it was somebody that hasn't even been accepted into the academy yet.
Yeah, previously our kind of minimum qualification was that you had to be certifiable, which means that you'd had to already have completed a police academy. But what's happened in the market is that the students that are putting themselves through the police academy is really dwindled to some very low numbers. For example, I know that one of my sergeants works at Blackhawk Technical College, and out of
I think we lost the chief.
I'm sorry, it must have dropped me.
Tim, do you want me to continue?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead,
Okay.
AJ. Thank you.
So what we would be doing at this point is sponsoring the person to go through the schooling. We are one of the later municipalities to jump on this bandwagon. Our neighboring communities have already started this. So we're just coming on board by adding this into our recruiting process. And the only thing that we changed were the education and training certification section by adding in the fact that we would be sponsoring the person to go through school. And other than that, everything else within the position description stayed the same. Again, what we're trying to do here is to broaden our opportunity for additional officers and individuals not having to pay for themselves to go through school, but to have the city sponsoring that. Therefore, hopefully that would give us a more long-term employee as well.
Yes, sorry about that. For some reason, it dropped me twice, and but thank you, AJ, for catching up there.
You're welcome.
All right, I see Alderperson Venegas and then President Hirsch.
Yeah, just a question on how the person is chosen for this and whether there are any diversity considerations or targets.
Yeah, we always consider diversity as part of our recruitment process. The entire recruitment process is governed by the Police and Fire Commission. They're actually the body that processes the candidates through. And we're always looking for to be as diverse as we can in the candidate selection, but we also want to make sure that we take the best possible candidate there is to be part of our workforce. And hopefully, if we do need to go down this road, it also opens up some of those candidates that wouldn't otherwise look at us because they're looking to a larger agency that already does send them to the academy. And so this would open the door for us to really broaden that the candidate pool to make it a little easier for us on selections.
President Hirsch.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. First, okay, so we sponsor somebody to go through this. What if one, they complete, but they're not really a top candidate? I mean, what if they complete and they're not somebody that we expected when we sponsor them to go through, and in fact, they're not, in the end, wouldn't be somebody that we would actually hire if they had gone through it and applied. What happens in that situation?
Well, for one, I think the Police and Fire Commission would try to select the best candidate out of the pool prior to sending anybody to the class. A couple of things can happen. Usually what happens, there's a work agreement that if they don't complete the academy, then they pay back the expenses to the city. There's also a commitment to the time frame that they're here. And then we also still have the probationary period that would be lengthened and wouldn't include the time that they spend on.
We lost him again.
That wouldn't include the amount of time that he was saying that they were in the academy.
Okay.
I'm
And then the
sorry,
second,
you dropped me again, so.
Yeah.
I don't know where you are, Greg.
I'm actually at the PD, so I'm really, I'll have to put a call into John, figure out what's going on, so.
And so again, I mean, I know this is just looking at just changing one thing, but to kind of follow up on Rachel's or Alderperson Van Agus's question with respect to training, where does diversity training come in and de-escalation training come in? I know those were added on to our other police officers. Where would that fit in to this new candidate?
Well, it actually starts in the academy and it's continued on through in-house training once they're done with the academy. So they're getting diversity and use of force training all the way through. De-escalation is a big part of the academy training now versus several years ago when it wasn't. Now it is. It's part of the curriculum. So they're getting that training throughout, and it's continued on once they join our workforce here. We continue that on within service training and so forth. So it basically starts at, from the academy and is carried on through employment.
Okay, great. Thanks, Greg.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Jean had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jean.
My apologies. My connection is unstable as well. The work agreement, if they were to go through the academy, is there a certain period of time that they would be expected to work in Stoughton? And if they were
Yes.
to not remain in Stoughton for that
Yes,
period
Jean,
of
would
time,
be
do they then reimburse the cost of the academy?
correct. We have a similar agreement that we have for our employees down at utilities that we put through school. So we would use the similar language and the payback.
All right, any other questions?
Thank you. And the only other comment I wanted to make is that we are following legalities and that we're an equal opportunity employer. But every now and then when I see notices go out, I do see mentionings of diversity are encouraged. Sometimes gender, I've noticed, just being a former sheriff's employee in Milwaukee many years ago. I think there are ways to just try to cast a wide net. And so my hope is that we can find good legal and public ways to say that.
All right, thank you. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 And any opposed?
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed. That motion does carry. And next item is R-158 of 2021. And this one was discussed earlier at Finance, Alderperson Schumacher.
Thanks, Mayor. R-158, 2021 resolution authorizing city officials to utilize $45,000 in building maintenance funds and $20,000 in contingency funds to fund the emergency replacement of 2 boilers at the senior center. So moved.
Second.
I heard a second. I think it was Alderperson Reeves. Alderperson Schumacher.
All right, so there has been a failure of one of the boilers in there, and these are 25-year-old pair of 25-year-old boilers that were installed at the same time. When they were looking at them, it wasn't really cost effective in order to repair the 25-year-old boiler, so they got some bids on replacing both of them at the same time, because if one fails when they were both installed at the same time, the second one is likely to follow it. So that, and then the monies are just coming out of both the building maintenance fund and the contingency funds, which would almost or pretty close to spend us out of cash in the contingency fund. Anything I missed, Rodney or Jamin?
I was just going to highlight the working boiler. We have had a repair history that we're concerned about. Otherwise, we'd limp that one along. But we think it's imperative to proceed with replacement of them both at the same time. Obviously, we want to do this as quickly as we can, so we don't end up in a situation where neither boiler is working yet this season. I did get a question about efficiency. We went from, as I reported at the Finance Committee, previous boilers were 85 to 90% efficient. The new ones are 96% efficient. So we are looking to increase efficiency at the same time.
Thankfully, this didn't happen when it was 25 below zero.
How true.
All right. Any other questions or comments on the boilers? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 And any opposed? None opposed, that motion carries. Next item, we're looking at going into closed session. I know it went through finance a couple weeks ago. Alderperson Schumacher, can you read the statute to go to closed session for us?
The statute is Wisconsin Statute 19.85, Paren 1, Paren F, for the purposes, and bear with me here, purposes of considering financial, medical, social, or personal histories or disciplinary data of specific persons, preliminary consideration of specific personnel problems, or the investigation of charges against specific persons, except where in paragraph B applies, which, if discussed in public, would be likely to have a substantial adverse effect upon the reputation of any person referred to in such histories or data or involved in such problems or investigations. Thank you for your attention.
And is that a motion?
That will be a motion, yes.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, and then I believe we need to do a roll call on this, Candy, to go into closed session. Is that right, Attorney Dragney?
Yes.
So whenever you're ready, Candy, you can take the roll to go into closed session.
There we go. Okay. Caravello,
Aye.
Doom,
Aye.
Hiley.
Aye.
Hirsch. Hunt,
Aye.
Jensen,
Aye.
Legaki. Did I
Aye.
lose her? Okay, there you are. Mayaski,
Aye.
Off.
Aye. Aye.
I got you, Jean. Thank you. Reeves,
Aye.
Schumacher,
Aye.
Tukowski,
Aye.
Venegas.
Aye.
Okay, that's 11 alders.
All right, and then for WSTO, make sure you shut off the video.
Mayor, before we jump into this, could I request about a 2-minute recess or so?
Sure.
Because we had to jump right straight into this meeting.
All right. 2 minutes, the
Thank you.
clock is counting. check.
They're still listed as being present.
See if they're streaming. So looks like we're good.
And they know enough not to record, so.
For the expenses as part of that project. The person has not handled those conversations well. The conversations have gone well.
Greg, we couldn't hear you. What'd you say?
I was wondering if it would be possible to use some of the stimulus money for this. I don't know if it's something that, that we could do. Wonder if Jamie could answer that.
I would probably want to run it by Baker Tilly first.
So there would be a motion to direct staff to pursue abatement of public nuisances at 525 Hill Street.
Is that,
I like that language, the raising and the taking away of the property could become provocative. And so if we can keep that
Here we go. There's my hand.
All right. So are there any objections? An open session.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
A motion and a second by Alderperson Doom. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of going in open session, say aye.
Aye.
All right, we're back in open session. I don't know if WSTO has caught that, but if they have, they can begin programming. Otherwise, we'll continue with the meeting. Would somebody like to make this motion then?
Sure, I'll make it. I make the motion that the city staff proceed with a non-summary abatement process to repair those conditions that make the home unsafe for human habitation, and that the city provide funding for that process, which may be assessed as a special charge against the property.
All right.
And I so move.
Second.
All right, any discussion on the motion?
Does the motion need to include the address of the property or not?
I'd like to keep it in a.
Yeah, to make the home at 525 Hill Street safe or unsafe.
All right, are you catching all that, Candy?
I got it, yes.
Okay, and I just pulled this out of the finance minutes, basically, if you need to go back to it. All right, so we're gonna include the address. Anything else?
And I did say may be assessed, as opposed to will be assessed, so it gives us that room to find additional funding.
Yes.
Okay. All right, anybody else? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 And any opposed? None opposed, thank you. Nice conversation, nice job. I guess that was the end of our agenda, so if anybody wants to make a motion to adjourn.
I will make that a motion.
Is there a second? Motion and a second, any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed, that motion carries. Thank you.
Good night, all.
Thank you all. It's a tough decision. Thank you.
Night all.
Good night.